After the funeral, the house felt impossibly quiet. I remember standing in the doorway, clutching my keys, listening for the sound of her slippers on the hardwood floor. Out of habit, I suppose. But there was nothing, just the tick of the old clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. I wandered into the kitchen where the morning sun used to catch her hair just so, and my eyes landed on her chair at the table. The cushion was still indented from where she'd last sat, a half-finished crossword puzzle tucked beneath her favorite mug. That empty chair seemed to swallow the whole room. Grief is a strange thing. It comes in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes crashing. That first morning alone, I tried to make coffee the way she liked it, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. But the cup tasted bitter no matter what I did. I sat across from her empty seat, staring at the steam curling into the air, and felt the weight of her absence settle on my shoulders. I thought if I just kept moving, kept busy, maybe the ache would dull. But every corner of the house whispered her name. I tried to find comfort in the little routines we'd built together. Folding laundry, watering her plants, even sorting the mail. For a moment I almost convinced myself I could get through this, that maybe, with time, the silence would become less suffocating. That's when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find her family standing on the porch. Her mother, her brother, and her sister-in-law. Their faces were painted with sympathy. Voices soft and careful, but there was something in their eyes I couldn't quite place. They hugged me, offered casseroles and condolences, but their glances darted around the house, lingering on the photos, the furniture, the things she'd left behind. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. At first I tried to be gracious. After all, they were her family, and I knew they were grieving too in their own way. Her mother, Evelyn, bustled into the kitchen, setting down a casserole with a practiced sigh. "You must be exhausted," she said, her hand lingering on my arm a moment too long. "Let us take care of things for a while." Her brother Mark and his wife Linda followed close behind, arms full of grocery bags and sympathy. I wanted to believe their intentions were pure. I really did. But as the hours passed, their presence began to feel less like comfort and more like an invasion. Evelyn started rearranging the kitchen, moving my wife's favorite teapot to a different shelf, tossing out the wilted flowers I'd been clinging to. "It's best to keep things tidy," she said, not meeting my eyes. Mark wandered through the living room, picking up framed photos, running his thumb over the glass. "She always loved this place," he mused, but there was a strange edge to his voice. Linda, meanwhile, had taken it upon herself to help with the paperwork. She asked about the will, her tone casual but her questions pointed. "Did she ever mention what she wanted done with her jewelry? Or the car?" she asked, flipping through a stack of unopened mail. I felt my jaw tighten. I hadn't even had the chance to look at those things myself. It wasn't just the questions. It was the way they moved through the house, opening drawers, peeking into closets, whispering to each other when they thought I couldn't hear. I caught Mark in our bedroom, rifling through my wife's dresser. He looked up, startled, and forced a smile. "Just looking for her old photo albums," he said. But the albums were on the bookshelf in the living room. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make a scene. Not yet. Every time I tried to retreat to find a moment alone with my memories, one of them would appear, offering advice or asking another question. "You know, it's only fair that everyone gets a say in what happens next," Evelyn said one evening, her eyes fixed on the wedding ring still on my finger. "She was our daughter too." I felt like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around my grief, afraid to touch anything for fear they'd judge me. I tried to remind myself that they were hurting, that maybe this was just their way of coping. But the longer they stayed, the more I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. One night, after they'd all gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. I realized I hadn't had a single moment to mourn in peace since they arrived. Their voices echoed down the hallway, muffled but urgent. I caught snippets. The house, her savings, what's rightfully ours. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that grief was making me paranoid. But deep down I knew something was wrong. I didn't realize they were already plotting behind my back. It happened on a gray, drizzly afternoon, the kind of day that makes the world feel heavy and close. I was in the living room sorting through condolence cards when Evelyn marched in, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mark and Linda trailed behind her, their faces set with a determination I hadn't seen before. "We need to talk," Evelyn announced, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. She didn't wait for me to respond. "We'd like to see the will, all of it, and the bank statements. We have a right to know what's going on." I blinked, caught off guard. I haven't even looked at everything myself yet," I stammered. "I was waiting until what?" Mark interrupted, his tone accusatory. "Until you could hide something? We know she had savings, jewelry, investments. You can't just keep it all for yourself." The words hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush with shame and anger. "I would never," I started, but Linda cut me off. "She trusted you, but we all know how you could be. Controlling. Always making decisions for her. Maybe you pressured her to leave everything to you." My hands shook. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, but the grief and exhaustion made my voice small. "That's not true. She made her own choices. She was my wife." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "She was our daughter, and we won't let you take advantage of her memory. If you have nothing to hide, show us the documents. Now." I looked around, desperate for an ally, but the room felt cold and empty. Even the walls seemed to lean away from me. I tried to explain that the lawyer was handling everything, that I was still waiting for paperwork, but they didn't want to hear it. Their accusations grew louder, echoing off the walls, each word chipping away at my dignity. I felt humiliated, stripped bare in my own home. The people who should have been my support had turned into my accusers. I caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. Mrs. Patel, our neighbor, was watering her roses. She paused, her eyes meeting mine through the glass. She must have heard the shouting, but she didn't look away. Instead, she gave me a small, sympathetic nod before turning back to her garden. The confrontation ended with Evelyn declaring, "We'll get the truth one way or another." They stormed out, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my own living room. I sank onto the couch, my heart pounding, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How could they believe I would ever betray the woman I loved? That night, after the house had gone quiet, I went to my office to gather my thoughts. The door was ajar, the light flickering. Papers were scattered across the floor, drawers left open, files rifled through. My stomach dropped as I realized what had happened. That night, I found my office ransacked. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices in the hallway, low, urgent, and unfamiliar. I pulled on a sweater and stepped out to find Evelyn and Mark standing with a man in a crisp suit, his briefcase perched on the entryway table like a silent threat. He introduced himself as Mr. Hargrove, the family's attorney, and wasted no time getting to the point. "I'm here to ensure my client's interests are protected," he said, his tone polite but icy. "Given the circumstances, we'll need to review all estate documents immediately. Until then, I've advised my clients to request a freeze on all joint accounts and assets." The words barely registered at first. Freeze? I stared at him, then at Evelyn, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Mark crossed his arms, his jaw set. Linda hovered in the background, her phone out, already texting someone. I felt the walls closing in, the air thick with accusation. "I haven't even had time to process," I began. But Mr. Hargrove cut me off with a practiced smile. "I understand this is difficult, but it's standard procedure. We'll need to see the will, the deed to the house, and any financial statements. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action." I felt like I was drowning in paperwork and suspicion. Every question was a trap, every answer twisted into something sinister. They wanted to know about every account, every insurance policy, every piece of jewelry my wife had ever owned. I tried to explain that most of it was still with the lawyer, that I was waiting for the official documents, but they didn't care. Their lawyer made it clear. If I didn't comply, they'd drag me through court, paint me as a thief, and freeze everything until the truth came out. I sat at the kitchen table, my head in my hands as the lawyer's words echoed in my mind. I remembered the day my wife and I first moved into this house, how we'd painted the walls together, laughing as we splattered color everywhere. I remembered the way she'd squeeze my hand when she was nervous, the way she'd rest her head on my shoulder during thunderstorms. She'd always said this house was our safe place, our little world. Now it felt like a prison. The pressure mounted with every passing hour. Evelyn and Mark hovered, watching my every move, whispering in corners. Linda started cataloging my wife's belongings, making lists of what she thought should go back to the family. I felt powerless, outnumbered and utterly alone. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room surrounded by stacks of legal documents, I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to the last real conversation I'd had with my wife. She'd been tired, her voice soft but steady. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "Don't let anyone push you around. You know what's right." I opened my eyes, blinking back tears. I wanted to fight, but I didn't know how. The legal jargon was overwhelming, the threats relentless. For a moment I considered giving up, letting them have what they wanted just to make it all stop. But then I remembered something, her jewelry box. She'd always kept it on her dresser, tucked away beneath her scarves. I went to our bedroom, my hands trembling as I opened the box. Inside, nestled among her favorite earrings and a faded photograph of us on our wedding day, was a sealed envelope with my name on it. My heart pounded as I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the letter. Her handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I'm so sorry for what you're going through. I know my family, they mean well, but they can be difficult. I've updated my will and left copies with our lawyer just in case. Don't let them bully you. You have every right to our home, to our life together. I love you. Be strong." I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter pressed to my chest, and felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in days. Resolve. She knew this might happen, and left me a secret weapon. The day after I found my wife's letter, I sat on the porch, the envelope folded tightly in my hand. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. Grief, anger, fear. But for the first time, a spark of hope flickered inside. I wasn't as alone as I thought. Mrs. Patel, my neighbor, appeared at the edge of her garden, her arms full of marigolds. She hesitated, then crossed the lawn, her eyes kind but sharp. "I heard some shouting the other day," she said gently, setting the flowers on the porch rail. "If you need anything, you only have to ask." I hesitated, pride warring with desperation. But something in her gaze told me she understood more than she let on. I told her in halting words about the accusations, the lawyer, the way my wife's family was circling like vultures. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap. "You know," she said quietly, "this isn't the first time I've seen them act this way. When your wife's father passed, there was a lot of talk about the inheritance. Some things went missing. People got hurt." She shook her head. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last if you let them get away with it." Her words sent a chill through me. I realized I needed more than just sympathy. I needed help. That evening I called Tom, an old friend from college who'd always had a knack for digging up the truth. He arrived the next morning, his arms open for a bear hug, his eyes scanning the house with concern. We sat at the kitchen table, the letter from my wife between us. I told him everything, from the ransacked office to the threats of legal action. Tom listened, then pulled out his laptop. "Let's see what we can find," he said, his voice steady. Together, we started piecing things together. Mrs. Patel provided stories from the neighborhood, whispers of valuables disappearing after family visits, of old grudges and quiet threats. Tom dug into public records, finding lawsuits and disputes that had followed Evelyn and Mark for years. Patterns emerged, contested wills, accusations of manipulation, a trail of broken relationships and bitter endings. The more we uncovered, The angrier I became, not just for myself but for my wife, who had tried to protect me even in her final days. I realized I'd spent too long letting grief and fear paralyze me. With Tom and Mrs. Patel by my side, I started to see a way forward. We gathered evidence, made copies of everything, and documented every interaction with the family. Tom coached me on what to say, how to stand my ground. Mrs. Patel promised to keep an eye out, to be a witness if things got ugly. For the first time since my wife's funeral, I felt a sense of purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was preparing to fight back. I looked at the empty chair at the table, then at the faces of my friends, and felt a surge of gratitude. If only I'd known what they were really after. I called the family meeting on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day my wife would have spent tending her roses or baking something sweet. The house was tense with anticipation, every surface scrubbed clean, every document stacked neatly on the dining room table. I wore my best shirt, the one she always said brought out my eyes, and tried to steady my hands as I waited for them to arrive. Evelyn was the first through the door, her lips pursed, eyes scanning the room for any sign of weakness. Mark and Linda followed, their faces tight with suspicion. Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer, brought up the rear, his briefcase clutched like a shield. They took their seats, glancing at each other, waiting for me to falter. But I didn't. Not this time. I called you here because I want everything out in the open, I began, my voice stronger than I expected. No more secrets. No more accusations behind closed doors, Evelyn scoffed. We just want what's fair. You've been hiding things from us. I met her gaze, refusing to look away. I haven't hidden anything, but I have found some things you should know about. I placed my wife's letter on the table, the envelope still bearing her handwriting. She left this for me. She knew there might be trouble. She wanted me to stand up for myself and for her wishes. Mark rolled his eyes. A letter? That's not legal. I ignored him and slid a stack of documents across the table. These are copies of the updated will. My wife changed it 6 months before she passed. She left the house and all joint assets to me as her husband. She made her wishes clear in writing with her lawyer present. There are witnesses. There's a video recording. I have it all. For a moment the room was silent. Linda's face went pale. Evelyn's hands trembled as she snatched up the papers, scanning them with growing disbelief. Mr. Hargrove frowned, flipping through the documents, his confidence faltering. This can't be right, Evelyn whispered. She would have told us. She didn't, I said quietly, because she knew how you'd react. She wanted to protect me and our life together. Mark slammed his fist on the table. You manipulated her. You took advantage of her when she was sick. You probably forced her to change the will. I felt the old anger rising, but I held it back. You know that's not true. She was of sound mind. The lawyer and witnesses will confirm it. I have every right to this house, to our savings, to the life we built together. Linda's voice was shrill. You're lying. You must have forged something. We'll take this to court. We'll tell everyone what you've done. I looked at each of them, my resolve hardening. Go ahead. I have nothing to hide, but you should know there are people watching. People who know your history. I've spoken to neighbors, to friends, to people you've hurt before. If you want to drag this out, I'll make sure the truth comes out, every last bit of it. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in Evelyn's eyes. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, I said, my voice steady. We're done with secrets. The tension in the room was electric, the air thick with years of resentment and unspoken words. I could see them recalculating, weighing their options, realizing that their usual tactics wouldn't work this time. But just as I thought I'd finally turned the tables, Mark leaned forward, his eyes cold and hard. You think you've won? You think a few papers and a sob story will save you? Well, we have something you don't know about, something that will ruin you. Evelyn nodded, her lips curling into a bitter smile. If you want a war, you'll get one. But don't blame us for what happens next. I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd expected anger, even threats. but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. But then, they played their final card, a shocking accusation. I barely had time to process Mark's threat before Evelyn stood up, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "You want the truth? Fine, we're going to the police. We believe you abused our daughter, emotionally and financially. You isolated her, controlled her, and now you're trying to steal everything she had. We won't let you get away with it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My hands went cold, my mind racing. Abuse? The very idea was so far from the truth it was almost laughable. Except no one in the room was laughing. Linda's eyes glittered with triumph, and even Mr. Hargrove looked at me with a new wariness, as if he'd just realized he might be representing a monster. Mark pulled out his phone, waving it in my face. "We have messages, voicemails. She told us she was unhappy, that you were making decisions for her, that you wouldn't let her see us." I shook my head, my voice barely more than a whisper. "That's not true. She was sick. She needed rest. She wanted peace, not drama. She asked for space." Evelyn's voice rose, shrill and accusing. "You're a liar. You manipulated her, and now you're manipulating us. We're calling Adult Protective Services. We'll make sure everyone knows what you did." The room spun. I saw my life unraveling, my reputation, my home, everything I'd built with my wife all slipping through my fingers. I imagined the neighbors whispering, the police at my door, the shame of being accused of something so vile. For a moment I almost gave in. Maybe it would be easier to just walk away, to let them have what they wanted. But then a voice cut through the chaos. "That's enough." Mrs. Patel stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes blazing. "I've heard every word. I've seen how you've treated him since the funeral. And I know the truth about your family's history. I have notes, recordings, and statements from other neighbors. You've pulled this stunt before, twisting stories, making accusations, trying to scare people into giving you what you want." She stepped forward, her presence commanding. "I saw how he cared for his wife. I saw the love and the patience. I saw you too, snooping, scheming, whispering behind his back. If you want to go to the authorities, go ahead, but you'll have to answer for your own lies first." The room fell silent. Mark's bravado faltered, Linda's face drained of color, and even Evelyn seemed to shrink in her chair. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat, suddenly very interested in his briefcase. I felt the weight begin to lift, the air in the room shifting. For the first time I saw fear in their eyes, not of me, but of the truth finally coming to light. Their own lies finally caught up with them. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and tense conversations. True to their word, Evelyn and Mark tried to press their accusations, but Mrs. Patel was as good as her word. She provided her notes and recordings to the authorities, and several neighbors came forward with their own stories, accounts of the family's past manipulations, their pattern of stirring up trouble wherever there was an inheritance to be claimed. The police and Adult Protective Services interviewed me, but this time, I wasn't alone. Tom, my old friend, sat beside me, calm and steady, while Mrs. Patel recounted what she'd witnessed. I handed over my wife's letter, the updated will, and every piece of evidence we'd gathered. The authorities listened, asked questions, and most importantly, believed me. It was a strange feeling being vindicated after so much fear and humiliation. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tinged with sadness. I thought of my wife, of how she'd tried to shield me from this very storm, and I wished she could have seen the truth win out. I wished she could have seen me stand up for myself, for us. The family's case unraveled quickly. The authorities found no evidence of abuse, only a trail of false claims and suspicious behavior on their part. Evelyn, Mark, and Linda were warned, and Mr. Hargrove quietly withdrew from representing them. The threat of legal action evaporated, and the accounts were unfrozen. The house, the savings, the memories, they were all safe just as my wife had intended. But the victory was bittersweet. The home I'd once shared with my wife felt different now, marked by the scars of betrayal. I walked from room to room, touching the things we'd chosen together, feeling both the weight of loss and the lightness of justice. I realized that peace doesn't always mean going back to the way things were. Sometimes it means finding the strength to move forward even when you're battered and bruised. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and kind words, and for the first time, I let them in. I let myself accept their support, their friendship. I even found myself laughing again, sharing stories about my wife, remembering her not just as someone I'd lost, but as someone who had loved me fiercely and trusted me to protect what mattered most. Evelyn and her family left town soon after, their heads bowed, their plans in ruins. I watched them go from the front porch, Mrs. Patel at my side. She squeezed my hand and smiled. "You did the right thing," she said. She would be proud. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. I had fought for my wife, for our life, for myself. I had faced down lies and threats, and I had won. Not because I was the strongest, but because I refused to give up. I learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when you're at your weakest. And in doing so, you find a strength you never knew you had. In the quiet that followed, I found myself relearning how to live. The house, once a battleground, slowly became a sanctuary again. I started each morning with a cup of coffee at the kitchen table, the empty chair across from me no longer a symbol of loss, but a gentle reminder of the love that had filled this home. I spoke to her sometimes out loud, telling her about my day, about the neighbors, about the garden she'd loved so much. The ache was still there, but it was softer now, edged with gratitude instead of pain. I realized that grief doesn't disappear. It changes shape. It becomes part of you, woven into the fabric of your days. But so does strength. I had survived the storm not by shutting out the world, but by letting others in. Mrs. Patel became more than a neighbor. She became a friend, a confidant. Tom visited often, and together we started a small support group for people who'd faced similar betrayals. We met in my living room, sharing stories, offering advice, and reminding each other that we weren't alone. I found purpose in helping others, in turning my pain into something useful. I volunteered at the local community center, speaking to seniors about their rights, about the importance of having their wishes in writing, about the dangers of trusting blindly, even those closest to us. Each time I told my story, I felt my wife's presence beside me, her hand on my shoulder, her voice urging me to keep going. There are still hard days. There are moments when the house feels too big, when the memories threaten to overwhelm me, but I remind myself of what I've learned, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That justice is worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. And that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring the past while building a future. If you're listening to this and you've faced injustice from those you trusted, know that you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. We're stronger together. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to be silenced. This is not the ending I would have chosen, but it's the one I've made my own, and in that I've found peace.